let's tackle the conceptual ground first and get into how fear holds people back and practical steps later. What is math?
That's a very difficult question. That's a question that is officially too difficult in the sense that nobody seems to agree on the definition. And it's so I have in one of my Substack posts, I have a screenshot of Wikipedia for a couple of months ago. It's been reshuffled, but the screenshot, the content stayed the same. The definition of mathematics, according to Wikipedia, says that nobody is agreeing on the definition of mathematics, which is a big issue. You know, you're teaching something to billions of people, and you don't really know what this is. So I think people have been mistaken because they were trying to define mathematics without any reference to human beings. So there are two ways of doing that. One way is to say that math is about, it's a science of numbers, of shapes, of things that exist in the Platonician world of ideas. And there is the other approach that is to say that, math is about logic, about proving things, about having axioms, theorems, and all that. Now, it seems like this is correct from far away, but when you practice math, you realize that there is an issue with both definitions. Basically, these objects that exist, well, it's not really clear what this means. It's one of the few scientific areas where people still refer to things that we cannot touch. They are very abstract. So nobody seems to agree whether these things make any sense. And the fact that it's about proof is actually something that's really contradicted by the practice of math. You spend your time dreaming, daydreaming, coming with crazy ideas, testing your intuition. So my definition of math, but it's mine, it's not an official one, would be that it's a special technique that involves imagining things and pretending they really exist, and pretending they have properties that are absolutely true. And this thing is gradually changing your intuition and make you believe that these things actually exist. So the Platonician side, which is that you believe that these things are really existing, is a side effect of math. And the logic side is the core technique to produce that side effect.
When you say that we don't know what we're observing, we can't observe math, we can't touch math, even physically speaking, you're not touching the objects because there's some barrier between you. It looks like there's direct contact here, but you never actually have direct contact if you zoom into the atoms and so forth. So what is it precisely that you mean that we don't touch math?
Well, what you can touch is, you can touch the practice of math. You can touch someone who is doing math, and you can discuss with someone who is doing math. And yourself, you can do math in your brain. So my favorite example of that is, can you imagine a circle? Can you?
Mm-hmm.
Can you see it? Can you touch it? Can you make it bigger and smaller? So, this is a very simple experiment that shows that there is something really weird going on in your brain. You feel that you see something, but this thing is not really there. So you sense that you can touch it, but of course it's not a physical object somewhere. And its properties, being infinitely thin, being perfectly round, these things do not exist in real life. So what is going on in your brain when you do that? So if we stop doing metaphysics for a while, and we forget about the traditional way of thinking about this question, which is, yes, circle exists in a kind of Platonician way, but if we just focus on what is really going on, well, there is you with your brain doing stuff in your brain, and this stuff seems to have some effect on your brain and do weird things in your brain. What is this activity? How do you characterize it? This thing for sure it exists. I mean, this is a true activity. It's a physical one. And so there is that article that I absolutely love, and I think that anybody interested in this question should read it. It's a paper by Bill Thurston, the great geometer, and I think it's from '94. It's called "On Proof and Progress in Mathematics," and he comes up with that stupidly circular definition of mathematics, saying that mathematics is what mathematicians do. But I think he's right in a very profound way. That is probably the best way to understand mathematics, is to deflate the ontology, to stop trying to do crazy metaphysics that we don't really understand. Just focus on what we are really doing. What are we really doing when we do math? And this is quite interesting.
There must be some through line, though, because I imagine if in 200 years from now, mathematicians or people who call themselves mathematicians all of a sudden are working on installing power lines and building homes, for some reason it evolved to that. We would say you're no longer practicing. You're using the same word, but the word has changed and you're not referring to the same object in a sense that people were referring to back then.
You're completely right. And the actual definition by Thurston from this article, I think, is there is a seed in it that is, it contains the study of numbers and of shapes. So you start with what we agree on being mathematical objects, even though we cannot really define them. But what we can do is we can define the fact that we're thinking about problems with numbers and shapes, because these things we're familiar with. So of course, yeah, it has to include arithmetic, it has to include basic geometry. And then there's a bunch of other stuff coming with that. And this is the activity called mathematics. And Thurston even says that the job of a mathematician is to try to improve the understanding of mathematics by human, in the sense that we don't get a quite perfect understanding of these things, but we try to make sense of them, we try to understand them, we try to study them. And doing that, we do a bunch of things. And this is this entire field that we call mathematics.
So when a mathematician is thinking about circles and spheres and so forth, these are, let's call them the objects of math. And then there's the practice of math, publishing papers, speaking to people, a community. In physics, it's similar in that you have a model of an electron, but the difference is that we think the electron is something out there. Now, in math, what are you modeling?
So this is the question. We don't really know. I don't understand physics, to be completely honest with you. So it's not a perfect comparison point for me, because I always struggle with what is an electron. I've never seen one. But at least in mathematics, you define the stuff you're working on. So you give a definition. And that definition is basically playing Lego with objects that you already agree that are existing. So the standard way to play Lego nowadays is to start with sets, even though we don't really know what is a set. But we have a fairly stable, naive intuition of what is a set. And from that, we can build more and more complicated objects. So in a way, the formal side of mathematics is basically the construction game that you're playing when you do math. But what's interesting is if you study logic and formal logic and formal mathematics, you have to accept at some point that what is true is formal statements that have absolutely no meaning, in a sense. So there is a dissociation between the activity of mechanical proof and the activity of meaning making. And when you do math, you actually try to align the two things. And this is what makes math interesting. So I think that these two aspects of mathematics are equally important. And actually, mathematics is this back and forth between having a meaningless definition, but it's just a syntactic game of combining axioms and deductions, and extrapolating meaning. And meaning is a human phenomenon. And this is where you cannot really eliminate the human in the mathematical practice. Even if you can formalize proofs, the fact that the proof is a proof of a theorem that has a meaning is what matters to you.
Okay, so just 2 minutes ago or so, you mentioned something about Lego, and we assume that these objects exist. But then it sounded like you were saying, well, these are just also the rules that we agree on, almost like chess. No one would say that the rules of chess exist outside of, or that they're referring to something that exists. I mean, the rules of chess exist, but what I want to know is, what is this alignment of a human notion of meaning making, and then the chicken scratch that is just something that we agree, you have these symbols here, and then you can manipulate it and so and so, and A can imply B, and so if you have A, then you could infer B and say B is true. So help me understand that, because when people say, well, this is a human enterprise, there's the tendency to think, well, then it's arbitrary.
And it's a tendency that is very profoundly ingrained in our culture, but is wrong. It's not because it's a human enterprise that it's arbitrary. And it's not at all about social deconstructivism of mathematics. It's not at all about that. It's just about acknowledging that there is something in mathematics that cannot be explained by formal logic and can only make sense if you view mathematics as a cognitive theory, as a cognitive practice. So, so let's pretend for a moment that we endorse the formalist view on mathematics. That is that, mathematics is just a meaningless game of symbols, and these things, because they're not human, because they're very stable, because they're machine provable, they survive humans, and they're kind of eternal in their own way, and there's no human involved in doing that. Now, the problem is when you look at how the formal theory of mathematics is built, you start from the axioms of, let's say, Zermelo-Fraenkel. But why do you choose that? What do they mean? Why do you study this set of axioms? So if you open a book about set theory, there's an interesting thing. And actually, this is really what got me into that story. Some while ago, I was teaching a class on the foundation of mathematics. And I was trying to do what I always did when I was teaching mathematics first, try to define the objects. And I realized something that I knew, but I had not fully realized before. That in set theory, when you say for all x, you don't say for all x a set, you say for all x. And when you have the axioms, let's say the axiom of extensionality that says that for all x, for all y, blah, blah, blah. X and y do not refer to anything. And actually, for all doesn't mean for all. It's just a symbol. So you have a set of strings to which, if you stick to the formal theory, are absolutely meaningless. This is already annoying. Why would you study that? Well, because apparently it seems to be consistent, even though we cannot prove it. Well, it's not a good reason. There are many sets of axioms that are consistent that we do not study. We study it because we attach meaning to that. And meaning is a cognitive phenomenon. It's not in the theory. There is nowhere in Zermelo-Fraenkel theory an explanation of what a set is supposed to be. And the word set only appears on the book cover. It's never mentioned inside. There's no description of what is a set. There's no properties of set. They're just statements that are just meaningless. Now, you could say, okay, we project meaning, but this is an optional thing we do. But this is not the case either. And actually, I think there is a very strong technical argument for that, which is the way mathematics behave as a scientific field. If it was a meaningless game of syntax, if we were to introduce a bug in the system would collapse. If you have a math paper, they're never really written in the full formal way. They have human hand-waving blended with formalism. This is the way math papers are written. But sometimes, because of that, there is a bug in a math paper. There is a theorem that is not true. And there are other papers citing that paper. And they use a theorem that is not true to prove other theorems, and can go on for 50 years. It happens. It happened in the past that this thing went on for 50 years without anyone noticing there was a bug. Now, if it was purely a formal theory, there would be absolutely no reason why mathematics would not collapse from that. When Andrew Wiles came up with his proof of Fermat's last theorem, the first proof he came up with was wrong. And then he fixed it. But if it's just, assembling something that has no meaning, there would be no reason why a false proof could be fixed. What does it mean to fix a proof? Every mathematician agrees that, this is what Wiles did. He had a proof with a bug, and then he found a fix to his bug. So if you want to make sense of just this very simple objective event that happened in the history of mathematics, you have to agree that there is meaning, because if there's no meaning, there's no way to fix a theorem. Fixing a theorem is coming up with a theorem that is close to the one you thought was correct. Or maybe having a lemma that is close to a lemma that you use that is wrong, but maybe there's a lemma that's close to it that is correct. But being close to is absolutely impossible to define in the pure formal approach to mathematics. It's not that it's incorrect. It's not that it's an incorrect notion. It's a meaningless notion. You have no proximity between two formal statements that have no meaning.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're enjoying today's episode. If you're hungry for deeper dives into physics, AI, consciousness, philosophy, along with my personal reflections, you'll find it all on my Substack. Subscribers get first access to new episodes, new posts as well, behind-the-scenes insights, and the chance to be a part of a thriving community of like-minded pilgrimers. By joining, you'll directly be supporting my work and helping keep these conversations at the cutting edge. So click the link on screen here, hit subscribe, and let's keep pushing the boundaries of knowledge together. Thank you and enjoy the show. Just so you know, if you're listening, it's CurtJaimungal.org, CurtJaimungal.org.